Welcome, everybody. It's a slightly rocky technical start, as often happens. We're so delighted to have so many of you zooming in from so many different places to join us for our online book club, and really delighted to have our panelists, that's very formal, isn't it? That's me using Zoom language, our guest speakers, who will be sharing their responses to the In Other Words publication. I'm going to give them some space shortly to introduce themselves. Ruth is going to talk through some of our housekeeping, just practicalities as we go through the event, but I just wanted to welcome you all. And this is my first time on a webinar, so if I look confused, I probably am. So Ruth, if I hand over to you, and then we'll go back to me, and we'll then come back to our speakers.
Great. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming. So my name is Ruth, my pronouns are she, her, and just to give a bit of an audio description of myself, so I'm relatively short, medium build white woman with mousy brown hair, shoulder length, and I have a nose piercing with a nose ring in my nose at the moment. I'm wearing a grey jumper, which is slightly bobbly right now, and I'm sat upstairs in my house in a very boring backdrop of a white room with a yellow curtain. But just a few notes on housekeeping for the Zoom. So first of all, we have two wonderful BSL interpreters with us today, Jemima and Grace. So thank you both so much for being here. We're going to keep them on the screen at all times, so you'll be able to see them, but they will be switching every 15 minutes or so. We will also be audio describing ourselves tonight. As some of you may be aware, there is an audio described version of the book, which all the artists created as well, and we'd highly recommend listening to it. It's definitely a piece of art in itself.
So my name's Kate. I am a middle-aged white woman with quite long lockdown long brown hair. I am sitting on my green sofa in my living room with a funny scribbly doodly picture behind me and some cushions. I'm wearing a blue jumper and a stripy t-shirt underneath. I have one hand, and on my left wrist, where I don't have my hand, I have a tattoo around my wrist, and my disability pops in and out of Zoom. I've been really aware of that in lockdown, so I might just pop it in and out. The format for tonight's event, as Ruth said, we're going to try and keep it quite relaxed and informal. And I'm going to go around and ask the speakers, our artists and invited guests, to introduce themselves. But before we do that, I just want to give a little bit of context. So I know that many of you attending tonight will have encountered the book in some way and may know this story already. But to give some context, the In Other Words book was co-edited by myself and Ruth, who you've just met, and Mark, who's listening in and we may hear from later. Mark and Ruth are both work at Metal. So we were the co-editors of the book, and it was co-produced by Metal and LADA, Live Art Development Agency. And the starting point for the book was really around our questions of a strong emphasis on getting back to normal post-pandemic. And for me personally, I had quite a lot of anxiety around the dominant narrative of normality and getting back to normal, and what that meant if normal wasn't really something that we were relating to before. I think as a disabled person and as a disabled artist, I was also quite concerned about an increase in medicalised understanding of lived experience and the body. And with Metal, we wanted to create a space for artists and thinkers and practitioners who were sharing we didn't know they were sharing the same ideas, but we wanted to put an invitation out to find out how people were feeling and what they were thinking, and specifically we framed that around what the artists the 49 artists that have contributed to the book, we asked them what their hopes and fears were for the future, for the other side, for the light at the end of the tunnel, whatever language we want to use. Obviously, well, we're extremely proud of the resulting publication, and hopefully the artists are proud of it as well. And I think we're specifically proud of the diverse range of responses that actually, what I personally always wanted to do in this publication was make a space for sameness and difference. And I really hope that we achieved that. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what our guests thought. And so I should also say that we've invited these brilliant guests in to talk about their responses and their reactions to the book, and to share that with all of you. And then hopefully we'll have a chance to, well, we will definitely have a chance to all share those at the end of the event. So in really practical terms, the way this will go, I'm about to ask all our guests to introduce themselves, and that will be one round. We'll go round once, and then in the same order we'll go round again, and I'll ask them to speak a little bit about their responses to the book, and then we'll open up for our guests to speak more generally and speak to each other, and then we'll open up so that we can all respond to your questions and you can respond to each other. So, Nina, if you could introduce yourself, that would be wonderful.
Okay. Oh my goodness, I don't like going first. Okay, so my name is Nina Muehlemann. I am an artist and academic, and I live in Zurich, Switzerland, which is where I currently am. I am sitting on my bed, although I don't think there is much of a view of that through the camera. I am a white femme in her mid-30s. My pronouns are she, her. I have shoulder-length dark brown hair. I'm currently wearing a pretty boring black jumper, black eyeliner, and then I'm wearing moon-shaped earrings that are decorated with clouds and a star.
So Rosa, you're next on my list.
Hello everyone, good evening. My name is Rosa Cisneros. My pronouns are she, her. I'm in Sheffield in the UK. I am wearing a black top with a baby sling still strapped to me because I did have my 11-month-old on my chest. I'm wearing I have medium length black hair that is up. My reading glasses are on the top of my head, not on my face. I just have them prepared in case I get tired, so they may come down onto my face. I'm wearing circular big earrings, a little bit like donuts, I think, with orange and gray in coloring, but still transparent. I'm sitting in front of French doors, they're called, I think. I've learned this terminology. So glass doors with a snowflake or Christmas ornaments hanging on there because my 5-year-old daughter loves snowflakes. So I think, yes, and to my left is a gray wall with 4 pictures. My heritage is Romani, Spanish Roma Gypsy, and my father's Serbian. And I lived back and forth between the US and Spain and Europe. So that's a bit why I have more of an American twang.
Sindri, you're up next.
Hey, my name is Sindri. I'm sitting in a sofa with my white big fake fur coat as a half background, and the wall behind me, I don't know what color it is. I'm in Sweden in an old house, and I'm wearing a gray beanie hat and a black t-shirt, and I'm using my phone. So due to a visual impairment, sometimes I will turn off my screen, just so you know. I have a white skin body, and I prefer the pronouns them or they. Him can be okay sometimes. I'm an artist. I work with dance as a performance maker and a freelance dancer. Thank you.
Okay, hello. My name is Swati Arora. My pronouns are she and her. At the moment, I teach theatre and performance at Queen Mary University of London. I was born in Delhi, which is why my skin color is brown. I am medium height, medium built, curly hair, neck length, brown eyes. I am sitting in front of a very boring white wall with nothing on it because we've just moved in this flat. I'm sitting next to the fireplace in my living room, which has a peace lily plant at its edge. And I can see that the shadow of the plant is visible on my little screen. And I'm really glad to be here.
Great. Thank you, Swati. And Harold.
Hello. Hi. My name's Harold Offeh. My pronouns are he, him. I'm an artist and lecturer. To describe myself, I'm a black man of Ghanaian heritage, middle-aged, with a mustache and beard. I'm wearing a sort of orangey corduroy cap and lots of corduroy, actually a black corduroy top. I'm sitting in a small room. I've got bookshelves behind me, and there's a kind of weird frosted internal window and a fake tiger head that some people might see. I think that's it. Really great to be here.
Great, thanks, Harold. I feel like we're like this awesome pop group. We've introduced ourselves. Yeah. So we're going to go around in the same order, and just acknowledging the slight kind of oddness of what Zoom does to fluid discussion, and you know we're all very used to that now. So what I would really like is to invite you in that same order, just so we all know where we are and there's no surprises, and Nina knows she has to go first, so that if you can just so you've all you've had the book and you've read the book, and also no pressure, but lots of the artists who contributed to the book are they're attending, they're listening in, which is wonderful. Harold's showing his homework, that's good. Yes, okay, everyone's done their homework. So if you we go around one by one, and just to share your personal and immediate responses to the book, and maybe if it's helpful to kind of think about your own hopes and fears. So maybe how the book has met you in the place where you are now. And please feel free to refer to specific examples in the book, or to speak more generally. I think, as Ruth said, if you're speaking to or about a very visual piece, it would be really helpful if you could just give a short description of in your own words, of the piece that you're speaking to or about. So Nina, over to you.
Because I love going first. Yeah, I think so. For me, one of the things that has been almost the hardest this year, I mean, a lot of things have been hard, but what I really, really miss is moments of connecting with other disabled artists or meeting other disabled artists, some of lots of which are also my friends, but also, I guess, meeting new artists and finding some kind of connection there. And I think for me, this is like the main thing that this really cool book did for me, in a way that provided some of that, and that it kind of put me in some kind of conversation with some of the artists that I already knew. I could kind of see where they were at the moment. And it also made me aware of some other really cool artists that I wasn't necessarily aware of either. So yeah, it just was like a very exciting but also cozy or homely feeling to it. as well. So simultaneously going to the bar and having a chat with somebody really cool that I've just discovered, but also reconnecting with friends and people I really like.
Perfect, thanks, Nina. There's loads in that I kind of want to come back to, or others may want to respond to. But I think if we carry on with our round table. So Rosa, if you're happy to share your thoughts.
Yes, I was surprised how much the book felt like my own thought process of being in the world, of this kind of thinking about the past and accepting that there was a future, but also this, I'm going to reference Brian Lobel's work, where he takes a television episode and then kind of describes that and then offers a lesson for the future. So there's this kind of back and forth. So even in reading, there were some shows that I watched when I was a tiny young girl, and I hadn't even remembered that. And so then thinking about the future in relation to this past event, it was quite layered and complex. And I loved that's how I felt throughout the pandemic, thinking about the past, but also somehow what can we take moving forward. So I just felt that particular part of the book was, well, the whole book, but this really, I think, could reference that process for me.
Thank you, Rosa. Thank you. I'm sorry if I'm really aware that this probably feels a little bit kind of functional, but we'll get there with the discursive part. I've lost Sindri.
Yes. Hey. I'm quite overwhelmed with the whole book, and I also, in addition to the book, I also tried to watch as much as I could or listen to the documentary Crypt Camp today. So I've been crying and laughing for so long today. Oh, so much today. And my head, I would say that like one of my main reactions to this book or to these texts is some sort of like an umbrella or like a museum or like a network of support and care that I can turn myself to find like strength and support. And what came up to me was that it felt like a very big chunk of like a hybrid poem somehow. So what I did was that I took notes verbally on my recorder that I later I just want to write them together into a big hybrid poem somehow. And what I mean with support is that I feel like there's so many situations I feel like I have such a hard time to relate to this whole situation because I'm not surrounded or I don't live with people with a crypt queer situation. So this book feels like a big hand on my back somehow. It's just very, very interesting to see also, or to read and hear how the book is so much creating new terms and like terminologies and words, and for me get into linguistics somehow and neologism in like the third way. We're making up our own future through the words and thoughts and ideas and pictures and images. And of course, the visual interpretation in that makes a huge difference for me. Thank you.
Thanks, Sindri. Keep forgetting to unmute. Swati, do you have to go next?
Yeah. I felt like this book created a relationship with time in a way that it slowed it down a lot, which was really beautiful. I loved the texture, the different font sizes, the colors, the variety of it. I could see the personality of the artist coming through. Even if it wasn't a handwritten note, I could just see what they're trying to say. And I made some notes as well, which I'd like to read out. I think they'll be more articulate. So just on this relationship with time, these artists dwell in a refusal. They refuse a hierarchical world where the normal is marked by anti-Black state violence, heteropatriarchy, ableism, and capitalism. They reminded me of Tina Camp, where she asks us to understand refusal as generative. Refusal to accept the terms of engagement from the state that limits your subjecthood, to not participate in any proposition of compromise. These artists also dwell in a time of waiting. We don't know what the future will be, but these artists are gesturing towards it and asking us to be attuned to all the senses. What they're asking for is an abolition of capitalist time and its mode of capture. Selena Thompson, who is on page 32, speaks about exhaustion, her being tired from the cycle of violence that repeats itself every few years. There's violence, there's rage, there's helplessness, and then the extraordinary violence becomes routine, and then we keep going on with it. Tony D. Paul, on page number 79, writes on self-care, and I loved it when he said, sometimes it's just a cup of tea and reading Black feminists like Audre Lorde and Bell Hooks, who are sitting on your bedside table every night. So just this quietness, this slowness, this relationship with time is what spoke to me.
Thank you, Swati. That was wonderful. Thank you. Harold.
Wow, to follow that's brilliant. I sort of ended up, I wish I'd had this earlier, I think, in during the lockdown, because I felt there was so much articulate and these different emotional registers. I mean, obviously, I think people needed to have gone through that period, and now there's a kind of, but I just felt it was a really great resource to read it. And I've been sort of flicking through it over the past week. Something that I was kind of really struck by immediately is just the forward and Arundhati Roy's that quote, which is brilliant, but particularly the end of it as well, that sort of trying to think or imagine a kind of sort of future. So, the line, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. And I think for me, that really sets up, I think, all these really amazing contributions from, these amazing artists. And I mean, there's lots that I want to talk about, but I won't launch into talking about everyone. But maybe I could just start by referencing the really brilliant Lois Weaver and the Lexicon for Change, and how just the kind of sort of structure of that, the ABC, the setting on the porch, inviting us to be on the porch. I think I was really aware of the modes of address and performance that are played out in each of the kind of contributions, and these tonal shifts that I think really reflect the complexity and diversity of emotions and psychologies that I think we've all been experiencing. But yeah, I was really drawn into Lois's, that kind of sort of ABC kind of taking us through, and and then these insights into history. So F for me is freedom, and speaking to legacies of kind of slavery, but thinking about kindness and kinship. I think there was so much in that kind of sort of structure that I really kind of felt sort of anchored it for me. I'll stop there because there is more that I want to say, but we should keep things moving.
No, please do say it as we come back. I mean, I think really there's so much in there, and I'm listening to you with such interest and trying to pull out different kind of, I'm trying to draw it into, which is perhaps impossible, into, oh, everybody thinks this, but there's something in what that I'm hearing from everybody is kind of what how, and I think this is what I'm really interested in, how the book spoke to you, how it spoke to you personally, and where it kind of met with where you're at. So Nina, you've referred kind of it creating a space to connect with the people that you were not able to connect with, and that really resonates with me. That kind of I became very aware really early on in lockdown of, as well as a focus on the norm, a kind of focus on that norm infiltrating everything, like normal families, normal ways of work, normal, you know, and actually really realizing that lots of that support for me came from outside of the place that I was being locked into. I think I'd just like to open it up. Is there anything you want to respond to each other, or to talk in more detail about the specific works? I think we should give some time to that.
Can I just jump in and respond to what Harold said about the Poet Sitting by Lois Weaver? Yeah, there's actually a phrase in Hindi which is very similar. It's called Adda Bazi. It's just basically sit with a group of friends over a drink and just chat, you know, and really profound things can come out of that. So it made me think about, I mean, she has written a lexicon, and she's, you know, I remember her word beginning with B is bees. And she's talking about this bees shivering together. There's this hum of the bees. And, you know, it's really beautiful. And then it basically is also speaking about intimacy, right? In order for this world to change at all we need to do is to feel safe, and we have to take care of each other, just like bees shivering together. You know, I thought that image was really beautiful.
I mean, that also really resonated with me. I was thinking about the bee as a kind of working class symbol, like this huge, so in Manchester, which is the worker bee is like the symbol of Manchester. So if you go around Manchester, there are these bees everywhere, and it becomes this really kind of great metaphor for, you know, the working class, you know, the kind of the sort of the mass of people. Yeah, she uses that really, really beautifully, I think.
Another term that I really like in there is, I think it's horizontal organizing, which is something like, it's always so interesting to me when somebody puts something in words that I know that has existed for like forever, but nobody ever named it that way, or kind of conceptualized it in that way, and it's so perfectly described to me what like so many friends of mine are doing at the moment, but also some of us have been doing kind of you know, all our lives in a way, you know, like working, organizing, being politically active from our beds, because that is kind of the only, or from our homes, because that is the only option we have. And then what I also really liked about that same contribution, kind of that it provided some kind of order in the way it was put into the letters. And I felt myself really drawn to the contributions that did that. Like also Tanya Ehlhardt played like a game with letters that I don't even know what you call it in English, but that I know from my childhood, and that also really appealed to me, I think, because everything is so unclear at the moment, that I really felt drawn to contributions that either had some kind of order in them, and or that also kind of talked about something pretty mundane in a way. So all the ones that were talking about TV, like Brian Lubell or Travis Alabanza's contribution, or Noemi Lackmeyer, who was cuddling an iron in her picture. Somehow that really spoke to me.
Yeah, to me too. I think the porch analogy or metaphor was very, very strong. And when I got the book, I was in Germany in a residency at Ponderosa, where you're sitting on a porch a lot during the days and talking about things or looking into the nature. And I think on a perceptual level, I think it was also beautiful how she wrote about like sitting next to each other, and also the horizontal, like sitting side by side, and the horizontalistic perspective of like somehow getting more into the listening aspect, which for me resonates into some kind of three-dimensional thinking rather than staying in this frontal aspects or this kind of binary thinking, which somehow gives us opportunity, and it leads me at least into the thing of being not so either or with this, because the biggest thing with this situation we're in is, and which was very much for me the situation before as a freelance artist and as a disabled artist, it's a lot about being in the unknown or in the not knowing somehow, and how we can through this, for example, what you say with the dictionaries or the alphabet or the structures or the board game, that with the spoon theory, for example, like I feel like it's a wish or a need for some kind of systemizing. Can you say that? Making something systemic or structural, but still be humble in that, and making that open for imagination still. Yeah. Like I never wished for doing a ballet class this much as in this pandemic. Like I need straight lines. Yeah.
Rosa, did you want to come in on anything there before, or you?
I've just been, as people were talking, I was remembering Beverly Bennett's drawing on page 61, which is in black and white and gray tones, and there's a line right in the middle of the page, and it's like a right angle, so that makes like a letter L, and then there are circles, well, not even a full circle, but a little bit more than a half circle, and that's a bit layered, and then there's another line, or not line, like another curve going through the L, and then another curve going downwards, crossing the bottom line of the L, and then there's a tiny circle in the middle of that. And I hadn't noticed the circle, the full shaded circle in the center, not in the center, but towards the bottom of it, for some time, because I was trying to, and the title of the piece is Touch, and then in parentheses, Personal and Collective Grief. And it's so simple in a way, but also so powerful, and in a way represents a lot of what we're talking about, that, you know, what Nina just said, that no one had put it in those terms before, this horizontal. Yes, my love, there's a woman here named Neva. Sorry, my daughter asked me a question. And so this picture kind of represents to me this longing for touch. As a dancer, also, I don't think I said that, I'm a dancer. And so touch has been something on my mind quite a bit, in how much I touch my daughters, or how I miss touching people, culturally, how touch. So this image represented this idea of grief to me, that grief is just grief, and it's felt in a number of ways. So the layering of this image of this half circle reminded me of that, but also that we are interconnected, but grief is grief, and everyone is feeling that in some way. So as everyone was talking, I was also reminded of that, and that we don't know what exactly will emerge from this, but this book is a beautiful example of something powerful that's emerged. But I'm also aware that there might be trauma that's emerging, and that this book also reminded me of that there's an undercurrent of trauma that several of us kind of understand on a really innate level for different reasons, because of our circumstances, our background, our experiences, you know, institutionalized situations and realities. So again, this 1 second, my lovies. So this picture, this image to me kind of allowed me to breathe and settle into, yes, that's grief for me. And I'm feeling that in some way. And yes, so I think that's just what I wanted to kind of add to this conversation.
It's so fascinating listening to all the very personal responses, and it's because it feels like it's quite a long time ago that we initiated the book. And Rosa, you're talking about things emerging, and actually I think that when we started talking about it, when Mark and Ruth and I, and then Metal and Lada in a broader sense started to talk about the book, I don't think we knew what it would be like. And that was a very interesting thing for us, I think, as a project, to not have an end thing in sight of what I think we knew what we would like it to speak to or give to people, but I don't think we knew at any point what it was how it would hold the work, or where the work where there would be parallels and where there would be differences. And I think, I hope anyway, that our curatorial process was gentle. And I think that I mean, I have to credit Ruth here, who I know is listening, that Ruth and Mark, but Ruth and I were kind of in very regular contact with the 49 artists. And I think it was we learned a lot, and were checking in with each other a lot about the way we were communicating, and trying to be really aware that how people were when they might have got the invitation to contribute to the book was quite different when we were at a different stage, because things were moving so rapidly, and there was a real sense of precarity. And I think that was very important for me, and partly that is my experience as a disabled artist, disabled person, that precarity was real. I wasn't just kind of writing about precarity from an academic whatever, I wasn't theorizing. I was feeling, and I think when you're talking about grief, Rosa, that resonates with me quite strongly, that I knew that what I was feeling and experiencing was somehow connected to the people that we were communicating with. I just want, and it's really interesting to me when lots of comments about structure and the relief or the familiarity of structured contributions, because actually, I mean, as much as I love all the contributions in the book, and I agree that the structured work and the somewhat formulaic, not formulaic, that's not the right word, but the listing, or the structured work, there is something in that. But I also found myself really drawn to the messier contributions, I suppose, or in terms of kind of feeling a space to put my own sense of mess and sense of not knowing and sense of not being sure. And I'm really, I mean, that for me is one of, I mean, I have lots of favorite aspects of the book, but I think we never wanted it to feel too tidy to as a book. I think I actually, and Mark may disagree with this when he comes in at the end, but for me there's a reason why the book is quite minimal. So, or the look of it. So, just to describe it very briefly, it's in what I think is a really lovely greeny grey colour. I think it's A5. It's a bit. I don't know the size. It's slightly bigger than A5, and it has a kind of embossed, shiny letters on the front, and it's quite simplistic. And I really like how that holds the contributions. Which was a curatorial choice. Sorry, that was a ramble. Does anybody else want to we've got time, so any of our speakers want to respond to any of the other works or anything you've heard from each other, or ask each other a question?
I think it's a good point, Kate, what you say, like in terms of like the structuredness or the listing versus the more messiness as a part of the unknowing also, but also for me, it's very helpful to just being able to have these amount of text to just read or listen to and hear what people are thinking of, because some of them for me I couldn't really refer them to the topic. Sometimes there was just poetry or thoughts or dreaming or abstract words, but that's also really helpful somehow, you know.
What we haven't kind of touched on, I don't know if this is too much of a massive question, but, or Harold, you've unmuted. Did you want to say something? Have I interrupted you? Just kind of what what does the question of what are your hopes and fears, what does that kind of, is that something that means something to you? What and did the book kind of, were there specific aspects that resonated with you from that perspective?
Well, I mean, I think for me, one of the interesting things about this, and your brilliant kind of forward sets it up as well, is this idea of what's normal, you know. And there's also Scotty's like brilliant kind of like polemical kind of work, which, you know, speaks to this like hideous word, which I hate, normalcy. I mean, it's like, okay, normality, normalcy. But anyway, but in terms of, I think what the lockdown and this pandemic has kind of sort of set up is a kind of like temporal disjuncture where we're sort of all held in this moment. And, you know, the rhetoric, the political, cultural rhetoric about a return to what we had before, you know, and, you know, by, you know, and there obviously there's a kind of like political agenda that's sort of driving that. But I think for me, there's within these works, there's a kind of questioning of that, of what is normal, what's this normalcy that we're supposed to be, and do we actually want to go back? And for me, it sort of taps into, and again, this is the Arundhati Roy, the brilliant quote for me is that idea that I latch onto, and I think is contained in the work, is like the power of like speculative fictions and trying to think, the process of thinking or imagining the future, or being self-reflective. And I think, you know, so for me, the whole publication is like a compendium of like processes, thoughts, methodologies that speak to possible futures. And for me, that's where this hope kind of lies. I mean, whether or not it happens is for me kind of irrelevant, but it's that investment in and the agency that comes from our ability to kind of imagine something else, and to challenge, for me anyway, any kind of sort of reductive idea of like the halcyon days of the past, or let's go back to this, you know. So yeah, I think that taps into this, for me, this idea of the hope and fears.
Yeah, thank you. That's great, Harold. Oh, Nina.
Yeah, so I think for me, kind of the hope and the fear kind of goes into a similar place, and that I think one of my biggest fear is that like throughout this kind of also going back to normality will be a normality in which kind of disabled people have disappeared, which I think is something where we have been terrified of anyway. Like we're always, there are so many spaces we're excluded from anyway. And with that also, I guess the fear was that those little spaces of community or of exchange that we have really, really fought so hard to have, that they would be also gone, for sure. So that was kind of my fear. But then I guess my hope would be that we find other ways to sustain them, or to keep going, or to work towards them, which I think, you know, this book is like the book itself is one answer to that, of other ways that might happen. And I also think, I'm thinking of the brilliant contribution of Quiplash, which is, I think, work hard and eat bread. Although in my head now it's work soft and eat hummus, because that speaks more to me. because I think there's something said for soft work, as much as there is also said for hard work, and kind of, you know, in a way, kind of thinking about those, maybe those utopias and those spaces, but at the same time also just, I think, even sustaining ourselves and caring for ourselves and caring for other people, doing the horizontal organizing is in itself so much that I felt like a lot of my mind was also centered around that kind of immediate need of caring for myself and caring for others. But I also think it's very important for that hope to just also focus on immediate sustenance and bread and hummus and all of that.
I think there's something in what you're saying that's so interesting about this. Obviously it's, you can't put the pandemic into 1 month, and actually the pandemic is not the only, as I and Metal were really clear on this, we never wanted this to be a response to, or a kind of fix or a solution from artists, because that was another thing that I was beginning to see a lot, is how will artists respond to this and make everything better? But I'm really interested in this notion of the before and after, and listening to you, Nina and Harold, it reminds me that the moment of political and economical crisis, it does spark a panic in me that I will be made invisible, which is what I speak about in the forward. But it also gives me a hope that this may be something that shifts. There may be that it also feels like a moment to I can't think of the physical analogy, but to kind of shoulder my way in through the barriers and just kind of make myself present in a way. There's something about in crisis, is there a possibility to make yourself, what is that relationship between the potential of becoming more and more invisible and more precarious, or more and more kind of powerful through crisis? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. You've both just made me think about the relationship between this and by this I mean the pandemic, as an opportunity, as well as, you know, and I suppose that's about hopes and fears, isn't it? Swati or Rosa, do you want to come in? Are you?
Yeah, I was just thinking of this concept of normalcy, and this Black poet and writer Diane Brand has called the pandemic as a reckoning. And she basically says, you know, for some people, this was an unprecedented crisis, but for others, the violence existed anyway at all levels.
Yeah.
And going back to Harold's image of the bees, the working class bees, right? When we entered this lockdown, some of the essential workers had to keep working, right? They had to keep the supermarkets going. The NHS workers had to protect everyone else. So Diane Brand also talks about pandemic as a calculus of life and death. And who gets to live and who gets to die depends on how much money they own, you know, what class they belong to. And with also the virus, the COVID originated in Wuhan in China, and which also led to a certain kind of social and geopolitical othering, which, you know, we are also on the verge of Brexit, right? Immigrants not allowed. So it's just highlighted all these inequalities that always existed. But it's just that we are paying attention to them more because we are attacked by it in our everyday lives on an everyday basis. So my hope, my fear is, again, this extraordinary violence becoming routine is my fear, you know. I hope it doesn't, but yeah, that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Swati. Rosa, and then Sindri, if you want to, yeah.
Yes, along the same lines. Definitely, it feels like there's a before and an after for me with, the pandemic starting, or the first lockdown. Now, this is the language that, is used. But on the other hand, I also felt I had to remind myself that I understand injustices, and I know I have the tools to get through them, because I know what that's like, and I've had to deal with that my whole life, and I understand, so sometimes I remember feeling like I've been here before, what are we so upset about? I know how to get through this. I know that, I'll find a way, because I've always survived. And it goes back to this idea of resilience. And when you are marginalized, you find, your comment about kind of elbowing through spaces, I think in some way, I can only speak for myself, but, and what I know from members from my Roma community, that, that's something that we've been doing. So how can we, so now I felt in that moment that other people are getting a taste of what an injustice might feel like.
I might give Rebecca 2 cards.
Okay, you give him 2 cards. Okay, madam, Mama's here. So again, that was kind of a space that I had to remind myself that I just need to go back to my body, trust what my body is saying to me, trust that resilience from the community that I've learned, and that we will get through this. And, for me, it's also this idea of care. I had, a newborn baby, and at that time, my 4-year-old, and it was, I felt a real fear for them, and something I hadn't really felt before. If I get it, fine, but what if they get it? That can't happen. And that became very real to me. And it was the first time I felt my family was threatened. So again, I had to then go back to, okay, if they get it, we'll go through it. And whatever happens, we'll get through it together. And just kind of coming back to that centering, and whatever that meant, whether it was dancing, sitting, being, walking. So again, the body and that breath really helped me kind of navigate that before and after, and that fear, and allowed me to find hope as well, that there were lots of beautiful people doing beautiful, kind things. And that was something that my mother always said, love can move mountains. And so, I was seeing that as well in the midst of all of the kind of, and, in a way, I think that's what this book represents. There's a lot of love inside. And it was made with love. You feel people, there's love, it has energy. And, that's something that you can feel negative energy, you can feel positive. And just going back to the book, I feel that there's a lot of positive love and energy inside of that I was moved by when I engaged with it.
Thank you, Rosa. Sindri, do you want to, I'm just aware of making sure everyone gets a chance.
Yeah, but this is +1 on so many of the things. I think, yeah, there's a lot of +1s, but really the curiosity of what we wish for, or what we're longing for, or what we miss, for example, because that comes up a lot, the grief of missing things, but also the fact of what we already have, I think is super interesting, and how that is something I feel is something that can be brought up much more, or it cannot be brought up too many times. That what Dan Dorr is writing, and also I think Jeremy, it's hard for me to quote people to find the names when I can't see them fully, but like assuming, stay healthy, assuming that you already have a healthy body, for example, that kind of idea, or stay with your family, assuming that you have a straight heteronormative family, all of these things like made me also think about time, and how we got a lot of time now to reflect on things, and in sense of like going back to the body, like, why am I doing this? Why am I working with this? And why am I working with dance? Like, if there's no performances or no production or anything, what's the origin of my lust or passion for this? And yeah, that's an importance, I think, in that.
So this is my invitation now to say, if anyone in attendance wants to pop a question into the Q&A box, we can kind of get our speakers to respond to those, or we can carry on talking. I know that Joe might tell me off for this, but Joe's put a comment. So, and I know that Ruth and Jack are going to read questions, but I think I was just sneakily reading this. So Joe Bannon, one of the contributors to the book, says, no need to answer any of these thoughts. I'm just going to put them here as I listen to you. One question is, many of you refer to kinship, community, coziness. What might a new kinship be now? What might we do to achieve it? Given that a lot of the state's messaging has been very normative messaging around normal family structures, and our disabled voices, or let's add marginalised voices as well, have been more absent or silent or shielded. And I think that the reason why I've kind of shared that, because it speaks to my point earlier, actually, about it. To me, it speaks to the whole kind of not fitting in whatever normal is, and this really wide open. It's interesting, when I was listening to you all speak just then, that I'm reminded that I actually have like a physical reaction to the idea of being forced into normal. That it's very difficult for me to see any aspect of my life or my work where I kind of fit into that. And I think now that there's this really dominant narrative of getting back into that lack of fit. So I think Joe's question around what could kinship look like in the future.
I've thought a lot about that. I think, Kate, we've had some conversations around this, and for me, I think that there is, I hope that we can celebrate our differences a little bit easier, and that this new, or this idea of community and kinship is actually about seeing that we each have a superpower, and that superpower and magic isn't threatening, because it was those superpowers, that has kind of helped us get through this pandemic. And so I hope that we're able to reflect a little bit more. I hope that we can be together and see our differences and not be afraid of those differences, and also lift each other up and see that there's a strength in numbers. And that's my hope moving forward, that we don't have to fear the unknown. And if you don't understand something, hopefully you can ask me and I can help you, and just engage in a respectful conversation. So that's what I kind of hope. Yeah.
Thanks, Rosa. Anybody else want to respond to that? Or with a new thought? You can just chip in.
I think it's the same in the UK, but here now in Switzerland, there's a lot of talk of like having exceptions for the lockdown for Christmas. So there's special rules where you're then allowed to do special things between the 24th and the 26th. And that whole idea is just so ridiculous to me. It's like there is no, I absolutely have no desire for that. I don't see how that benefits my life in any way. And again, there's kind of this assumption that you're having like this normative family structure, this normative relationship to Christmas, that you have any kind of relationship to Christmas. All of that, and so bizarre to me. And I think for me it's very much like that also prompted me to kind of then think about the moments that are maybe important to me, that do have that kind of significance. And in particular, I think that I have learned through working more digitally, for example, maybe to establish deeper connections digitally than I managed to do before. I think I have gained some skills through that, of not just chatting to people on Skype, but actually there have been kind of new rituals around that. There have been new kind of ways of finding common experiences, of, you know, chatting to someone as they make their dinner or whatever. Kind of as basic as that sounds, it also isn't. And so for me, I think it's very much, I very much hope to kind of to transport that to wherever we're going, and to kind of take those new things that I have learned around access, because that's what it all is about in a way. It's about access. It's about finding ways of adapting and participating, and to carry that forward, and to kind of create more kinship through that, and then also kind of maybe doing that, finding some kind of hybrid mode of the digital and the in-person mode once we're allowed to do that.
I mean, I know there's a question, so I'm going to hand over to Ruth in a moment, but one thing that I know came up a lot, you just reminded me, Nina, in the how we've started to connect virtually and digitally, that actually there's a real sense of frustration and anger in the community of disabled artists that I exist in, that actually we've been repeatedly told that level of access is not possible, that we can't be in a space if we can't be in the space physically. And then suddenly, as soon as there's this economic or politically motivated drive for it to happen, it happens very, very quickly. So in a sense, as you've said really articulately, I hope that in the best way we can hold on to that. I hope that we don't kind of just push isolated people into the virtual, but we can have this really fluid relationship with virtual or alternative communication.